Hello everybody, it's Duck7 with another video. This time we are playing black-white Gix-blade. Okay, so I think one of the most important creatures in this deck, except for the Grief and Solitude, of course, which are we trying to scam early in the game and win the game like that. Gix is a very important piece in the puzzle. So we are going to talk a little bit about this deck. So the basics. This deck is trying to scam elementals early, especially Grief, and then using either Undying spells like Undying Evil or Molecular Rebirth, which has the same effect, or Ephemerate to blink dead creatures and for 1 mana provide great value like discarding 2-3 cards and getting 3-2 or 4-3 body on the field, which can attack opponent and be really aggressive. Okay, so other than that, we are playing some valuable creatures in our deck, like Doughty Void Walker, which is a very good card in a deck when you're playing some discard spells like Thoughtseize and Grief, and you can discard the powerful cards from opponent's hand and then just play it yourself with your Doughty Void Walker. Also, Stoneforge Mystic, very strong piece in this build. Stoneforge, when you play Grief turn 1, when you scam it into play, and then you cripple your opponent's hand, and then when you play Stoneforge Mystic on turn 2 and put Caldra into play turn 3, it will be very hard for opponents to deal with that. Also, Thoughtseize can work as well. That's it. Other than those spells I numbered, we have 2 Fatal Pushes, and it's the only single removal I play in this entire deck. Okay, so we have some usual equipments, the Stoneforge package, Caldra, Batterskull, and the Sword of Fire and Ice. That is it. Gix is one of the most important creatures in this build. This is a creature that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, draw a card. So this creature triggers for each creature dealing damage to your opponent. So if you deal damage to your opponent with 5 creatures, you can draw 5 cards, pay 5 life, and so on. It has the 7 mana ability, but it is not relevant because you will almost never use it except in some fringe cases. Okay, so that is it. That is the gameplay. So either scam, Solitude and Grief early with Molecular Rebirth, Undying Evil, Ephemerate, then use Stoneforge, Mystic, Doughty Void Walker to get enough pressure to opponent before they stabilize after scamming our elementals, and also using Gix as a powerful, really powerful card advantage engine, and you will see just how powerful it was in the league I'm going to do the replay of. Okay, so I think this was one of the craziest leagues I played ever on MTGO since I started playing. The draws were so powerful, and just opponents weren't able to win with the most powerful hands. It felt like I'm literally just putting cards on top of my deck, and it was just a very crazy league and fun to play. Okay, on the sideboard, I have a video of this exact list with some sideboard changes, like maybe 2 months ago on my channel. If you want to check that out. And we in this list, the only change is some tweaks on the sideboard, like addition of Elish, Mother of Machines. I don't think it's necessary in the main, but it can be really good sideboard piece. This Fracture card showed just very powerful in when I played it previously, and I really like that it's both black and white, so it pitches both to Grief and Solitude, and it has been just um, very useful solution for artifact enchantment, planeswalker removal. Okay, so Dam has been great. This is the best, one of the best removal spells in entire Modern. You can destroy target creature for 2 black mana, or Overload for 4 mana, destroy all creatures, they can be regenerated. It's pretty crazy, and you can use it both ways. And it kills Murktide, of course. It destroys any creature without any other conditions, and you can just clear the board when playing against Hammer Time, stuff like that. Okay, as we are talking about Hammer Time, we have additional Hammer Hate. This is Temporary Lockdown. Temporary Lockdown is one of the best cards in the game to play against Hammer Time and similar decks like Scales, Affinity, stuff like that. Okay, so we have two Orvars. This is a mid-range deck. I think at this moment every mid-range deck need to have a few Orvars on the sideboard because creativity is usually good in mid-range matchups, and that's why we have those. Okay, we already said Elish Norn. We have two Sanctifiers and Vec. So Sanctifier and Vec says that it has protection from black and red and exiles all black and red cards when they touch the graveyard. Okay, so this can work against us, against the Grief, but thing is, we will mostly use Grief before we cast the Sanctifier, and we can always hard cast it later. So I think Sanctifier is so good against certain decks like Scam and often Murktide that it's just good to have it, and it still doesn't affect our Stoneforge Mystic, Solitude, and we also have 4 ephemerates, not just the Undying effect, just the 5 Undying effects in this deck. So it doesn't it can affect us slightly, but not as much as Ragdoll's Scam. It just can just completely demolish a lot of cards from that deck, and I think it's a good sideboard inclusion. But there are certainly other possibilities. Okay, there are two Giant Magistrat because Cascade deck is again very popular. People are playing a Living End and especially Rhinos a lot. Currently on the MTGO, it's very common to face Rhinos almost every league. Okay, so that is it. That is the whole deck. Let us check the gameplay. Okay, let me find it. Okay, this was a game one. We will just start with the first match. Okay, this was a 5-0 league. I played second. I had the scam spell. I had the grief. I just needed the black card here. Or I can also scam Solitude. So I started slowly, but not doing anything special. My opponent played the boom, destroyed my land, and in response I scammed my Solitude. I had enough lands in my hands, so I was pretty safe. I played the Solitude. My opponent killed it. I played my Darty. They have another removal. It was not a great situation, but I had my Sword of Fire Ice playing against a red deck, and most of their removals are red, except for Solitude, I guess. So my opponent went for Spyro, so that was a pretty good draw for the opponent. They discard a land, draw 2 more cards, so they were in a pretty good situation, but this was a defining moment where I was successfully played my Esper Sentinel and equipped it with the Sword of Fire Ice, and my opponent just um, didn't have a much chance after me doing so. So each turn I attacked my opponent for 3, killed some of their creatures freely, and played Grief, discarded a card, also got a draw from the sword, discarded 1 Spyro, but they had another, drawing 2 more cards. My Grief had Menace, so they can't really block anything, and the only solution at this moment is really um, the only solution is Solitude, but I was able to play my Ephemerate in the draw step, so I discarded both of their cards they had in hand on instant speed in their draw step, so they didn't really have anything in their hand, and sure, they tried to They double blocked the Grief here. I decided not to use the Malakari Rebirth because I was on low on life and didn't want to go any lower. So I just draw a card with my land, play another Cesspit Sentinel and Doughty Void Walker, and that was a lot of damage on the field. So good thing with Gix, you can choose to draw a card, but you don't have to. So I didn't want to attack with my Esper Sentinels. I wanted to have some blockers because my opponent can also just exile their Spyro from the graveyard to get 2 tokens. And so I'm in a little bit of danger of them top decking something and succeeding to kill me. So I stayed back with Sentinels, played my Gix as a blocker, holding Fatal Push in hand, and my opponent couldn't escape from this, and this was the end. Okay, so it was time for game 2. So this game was won at that moment where when my opponent played the Spyro, draw 2, and I play my Esper Sentinel, equip it with Sword of Fire Ice, and Sword of Fire Ice just very efficiently won that game. I decided to go for the Esper Sentinel this situation, so they can play a 2-mana spell without me drawing a card, or they're forced to kill the Sentinel like they did. So in this moment I had 2 Totsis and I decided to look at their hand and they had good cards, like I discarded the Blood Moon and the Prismatic Ending. I let them use the Boombass because I had more lands in hand. And then I scammed Grief next turn, seeing discarding Chandra and another Blood Moon from their hand, leaving them with just 1 Chandra in hand. And in this situation, I had Stoneforge on the field and needing just to top deck another land to play my Caldra and Sword. And as soon as I top deck land, my opponent concedes because they were left with the Chandra in hand and my Caldra was about to land, and that would be game over. Okay, so my opponent had some good stuff going on, but I just had the answer to anything. To everything. Okay, so this was game 1. Game 2. Mulliganing to 5 here, keeping 2 Doughties and Undying Evil. It was. I'm not 100% sure. Was it Hammer? I think it was Hammer. I kept a pretty weak hand against Hammer Time, and 2 Doughties and Undying Evil just don't do a lot. Yeah, I shouldn't have kept the Undying Evil because I drew into another and didn't have a 3rd land in this situation, but I had no way of knowing this. So Undying Evil would be good in situation if I top decked Grief or something like that. I found my Caldra, but was really missing that 3rd land to be able to kind of get back into the game. My opponent got Shadow Spear and Caldra in this situation, and now I was able finally get put my Caldra on the field. I let them draw a card. I find Butterskull. So I can put 2 equipments on. Caldra would Caldra would exchange with opponent's Caldra, but my opponent had the Giver of Runes in this situation, and they just played Pure Steel Paladin, I think, next turn to equip everything on Ornithopter to be certain they kill me, so that was the game. Okay, pretty easy win for the Hammer Time in situation where I kept a very bad hand against Hammer. I didn't know what I was playing against, of course, so I had a decent board and I boarded some cards, draw into them, and I was playing first. So I started with Sentinel. Sentinel is very good here. They have a lot of non-creature spells too. So I just played my other Sentinel past the turn, holding all the time Ephemerate Solitude. They played their Sentinel, played the Urza Saga. Had multiple options here. I decided to kill their kill the Urza Saga. I let them draw a card, so I'm able to ephemerate if needed. If they play a hammer, they got to let me draw some cards. So that was the reason why I wanted to leave my mana open. In this situation, I went for Totsis first. I look at their hand. They play Spell Pierce. I have free interaction, so I pay the mana for Pierce. They had Plains, Colossus Hammer, and Spell Shaper Gift in hand, which was pretty good. They cast the Steel Shaper's Gift, play the Plains, find another hammer. But in this situation, this meant if they want to play this, they need to let me draw 2 cards. They decided to go for it. They played one hammer, they played another hammer, and in response to second hammer, I just pitched my Solitude. I got a lot of cards from my opponent playing into my Esper Sentinel, so it wasn't a big deal. I still had a lot of cards in the hand. I decided to get rid of the Esper Sentinel and start attacking, holding all the time Ephemerate, Fracture. A lot of good cards here. My opponent is on a lot of life, but it just doesn't matter as much. When I stabilize, it's over anyway. So I go for the Stoneforge here. I want to find my Kaldra, put it on the field. My opponent is still on 3 mana, so these 2 Esper Sentinels are still kind of problematic for the opponent. Okay, they go for Urza Saga. I decide to not do anything at this point. My opponent plays the Paladin, goes for the Stoneforge equip, and in this situation, I decide to first. I wanted to first draw a card with my land because I wanted to see if I'll get another card to pitch other than Fracture, because Fracture would be good to kill Urza Saga next turn. I got Undying Evil instead, so I decided to use the Undying Evil and leave the Ephemerate for the next turn. So I killed 2 of my creatures, and while my opponent was tapped, they didn't have a third artifact to use the Pure Steel Paladin abilities immediately. So I put my Kaldra and into play, attacked with both of my creatures, then exile Pure Steel Paladin in the second phase, and still holding other Ephemerate, which is just super strong in this situation. Also using my other Ephemerate to get my Butterskull, which just puts another very good body on the field, and had a Fatal Push for the next turn to kill more creatures. So just a lot of removal here. I had such a multiple options that my opponent really didn't stand much chance here. Okay, so they go for the Colossus Hammer, play the Esper Sentinel attacks. I Fatal Push in response, and my opponent concedes. That was it. Okay, so we can now watch game 3, deciding game in the Hammer Time matchup. Okay, I had the Grief here, had the black card, I just needed Undying Spell or Ephemerate, and I got it, so I was able to play Grief turn 1, discard the Stoneforge Mystic and Colossus Hammer from my opponent's hand, leaving them with just lands in hand, so it was a very good start for me. Still, I had a Stoneforge Mystic, finding Cauldron in this situation, and Fatal Push for next turn, so I was in a risk definitely here. My opponent top decking the Colossus Hammer, but I really can't play around everything. So I go for the Totsis in this situation. And in response, my opponent pet to exiles. So I was able to put Caldra into play. All again in this situation, I risked my opponent top decking, but didn't have much choice. I had a 2-turn clock here. My opponent didn't top deck anything, and I should have attacked first. It wasn't not necessary to play the Stoneforge. I should have sacked the land first to see what I'll get, and then play the Stoneforge. I attacked with both, put my opponent to 2 life, they were forced to block here, and I was holding Fatal Push, but my opponent still had the Giver of Runes and the Inkmoth Nexus. So in a situation, if they top decked Colossus Hammer, exactly Colossus Hammer, or if they had the land plus Steel Shaper's Gift, they would be able to kill me despite the Fatal Push, but that was it. That would be a huge top deck for opponent, obviously. And that was the match 2, end of the Hammer Time matchup. Okay, so we can now go to match 3. Match 3, I played against Dimir Shadow Tide. I had 2 Undying Effects in my hand. I had Thoughtseize, Esper Sentinels, so pretty good hand. I decided to start with the Sentinel. It's always a very good play when your opponent just plays the land and pass the turn. Okay, so in this situation, I went for the Thoughtseize and play another Esper Sentinel. My opponent was left with Stubborn Denial and the Colossus and Consider in hand, and I discarded the Gurmag Angler. So they played the Consider, they played the Otavara, they had Stubborn Denial in hand and decided to attack with both Shadows, and I definitely wanted to trade with one. So my opponent, this situation, 4 cards in hand, Stubborn Denial, trying to dig for something, and they successfully done so, played the Murktide, huge Murktide, in this turn 7-7, which was definitely a problem, but I had multiple options here. I could just attack with Caldra, but I opted for Batterskull. So in this situation, I can try attacking with Batterskull, and if I succeed to play the Doughty, I can equip Batterskull on the Doughty and attack with Vigilance and Shadow. I misplayed here this situation. Maybe it wasn't a misplay. I think it was a misplay. I should have played the Malachi's Rebirth. I regretted it as soon as I passed the turn because I remember they have the Stubborn Denial in hand, so it wasn't a very good play. And now I would be able to, if needed, equip Batterskull on the Doughty and just attack with the Shadow lifelink. But my opponent didn't attack very well, and they didn't count the damage, and I had the lethal on the counter attack, and that was the game. My opponent didn't have a solution, so that was it. Opponent shouldn't have attacked with the second Shadow. Okay, so game 2, I kept Grief, Doughty, Stoneforge hand, which was decent. Opponent decided Grief, Thoughtseize Grief, but I immediately got another one. I started with Doughty because it's a very good card against opponent's deck, against Murktide and Gurmag Angler. But opponent was able to kill it and kill the Sanctifier too, both of my creatures that hate their graveyard, so they had a lot of counter spells this game. So I went to, my opponent was stuck on 2 mana, so I just played the Sentinel first to make them let me draw a card, but they played Dress Down and Response, so I wasn't able to play Stoneforge that turn. I attacked with Esper Sentinel, my opponent goes for Fatal Push, and I decided to use the Ephemerate because Esper Sentinel was just doing a very good job at this situation, because my opponent was kind of low on mana. Now they got a 4th land, so it wasn't a big deal. They paid the Esper Sentinel tax, and I was able to use other Ephemerate on Stoneforge Mystic, so they weren't able to find the removal spell, and I got both Batterskull and Caldra in my hand. And so I was able to put Caldra immediately on on the table, attack for 6 damage, leaving them on 5 life, not being able to raise the Caldra, of course. So I also got a removal for the Murktide. They were able to bounce the Borrower, but I still had the Batterskull and the Rebirth and the Solitude, so it was pretty strong hand, and just my opponent wasn't able to deal with this definitely. Okay, so that was match 3 against Dimir Shadow. And we can now go to the match 4. Okay, match 4 was a very interesting and very good example of how strong Gix can be. I didn't draw it much, I just had grief stuff, but in this match Gix just did a hell of a job. So I went for my opponent had some discard spells here, getting rid of the Dati. I played my Malachi's Rebirth. I still didn't want to let them hit me with the Ragavan, trying to wait for them to play another creature, then try to get both of creatures with Solitude. Of course, they knew what my hand was, so they weren't in a hurry to cast another creature, which was alright for me. Waited for another land, and in this situation now I decided to go for it. I exiled the Ragavan, and because I had 2 spells to protect my Solitude here, so I went for Undying Evil, and they went for Bolt, but I had the Ephemerate, and I knew my opponent's hand, so I really wanted them to force them to use the Assassin's Trophy, and because I really wanted to get the land, and I knew I got rid of the Bolt, and I knew about Assassin's Trophy in their hand. I wanted them to use it, so I got them to use the trophy on my creature, uh, destroy their treasures, and I get the 4th land. And now, in this situation, I'm just in a great advantage because my opponent is on 1 land, I have 4, and I have Esper Sentinel and Gix. So they played a lot of their removal, and if they don't have a bolt for the Gix now, Gix just takes over the game. As you can see here, I just drew 2 cards, play Grief. Opponent is now able to play. They have 3 Tarmogoyf in hand, so they play 1. Sorry, 2 and the Tireless Tracker. They played 1, I then Solitude, the Tarmogoyf, attack with everything, draw 3 more cards, which is pretty crazy, and my opponent definitely can't compete with that. So that is how Gix wins games, and you will see it even better in the next match. Sorry, in match 3. Okay, so game 2 of match 4. I had to mulligan this. I kept a fair hand. And the Jund is one of the best decks when you're playing Fair Magic, so it wasn't enough for this game, but I was okay. Had a Stoneforge, Gix, just wasn't able to use this Ephemerate very efficiently. I decided to wait next turn so I can play the Stoneforge and protect it with the Ephemerate. I played my Stoneforge, get the Caldra, holding the Ephemerate, and it was a good decision. Definitely, I was able to ephemerate it. I find also Batterskull. And in this situation, if my opponent didn't have another removal, I would be very well positioned. But of course, they did have it, and they were able to attack for 3, start attacking me, have the Urza Saga and the Brennan 6 assembled. So they were able to kill my Stoneforge, and that really put me way behind. I played my Sentinel and Gix, but now my opponent has 2 large constructs with Vren on 7, bringing back the Urza Saga, getting Shadow Spear, equipping, staying back with everything, defending the Vren, and I'm not able to get rid of this. The Vren engine is too much and I had to concede. Okay, that was a very quick game 2 loss. And now game 3 in the match 4 against my opponent, Gix completely taking over the game. Okay, I go for the Swamp here, holding Solitude, Ephemerate, Undying Evil. My opponent goes for the Ragavan, and this time I immediately go for it. I scam turn 1 Solitude and start attacking my opponent with 4-3 life linker in blue-red scam fashion. Okay, so I was holding another Ephemerate to protect my Solitude, and 4-3 on turn 1 is a huge attacker. And in this situation I had Gix, and Goif was smaller than Solitude, so I thought it wasn't necessary to it wasn't really necessary to use the Ephemerate in this situation. My opponent went for the Fable, and I drew another white card, so I scammed my Solitude, killed both of their creatures, still had the Ephemerate rebound resolving next turn, attacking with Gix, and drawing 2 more cards, which is pretty crazy. And I drew into Undying Evil, and my opponent is now on 7 life, and this is pretty bad for the opponent. You can see just how scary this Gix can be in just scamming these elementals every turn. And I had another Undying spell for my opponent's removal, and that was the game. Okay, so that was the match 4. So we can now watch the final match, trophy game against trophy leader Magic Tonga, playing mostly Cascade decks. I kept a 0-lander with just Molecular Bird being my only land, and I top decked. My plan was to play the Molecular Bird, then go for the Undying Evil turn 2. But when I top decked Urborg, I decided to go for the Undying Evil immediately. They had just the cyclers in their hand, so I removed some of them, leaving them with 2 architects and some lands. In my opponent it cycles more cards, and in the draw step I go for the Grief, and I instant speed look at their hand. Their hand was just lands and 2 living ends, and now I was able to play my Doughty. Play my Dati, attack with Grief, and now discarded the Force of Negation with another Grief. So in this situation, if my opponent finds the living end, I'm able to sacrifice my Dati Voidwalker, get my opponent's Force of Negation, and counter the spell, and that sealed the game. So that was game 1. Game 2 was pretty brutal, you will see. It was turn 2 concede. I kept very good hand against my opponent. They start first, cycle the street rate. I go for the Grief. Turn 1, my opponent subtlety, so I put Grief on top of my library, and I'm still able to use it despite the subtlety. So they just play a land, pass the turn. I play the Grief again, look at their hand. They go for the Waker in a response. I look at their hand, it was Leyline and Breeding Pool. I decide not to use Ephemerate on my Grief because I just didn't want them to top deck Cascade spells. So I played my Let the Grief Die, played the Dranite Magistrate with the Stoneforge Mystic in the hand for the next turn. It was a very good clock, so I went for that, and my opponent immediately concedes on their turn 3. That was the game. Okay, that was the entire league. League was, I think, pretty brutal. Crazy games, crazy hands from this deck. You could see in a few games just how crazy powerful Gig's card advantage can be, and it just carried that 2-3 games and it would be unwinnable without it, I think, or much harder at least. So it was I'm very satisfied with this card in this matchup. It just does everything you want it. It works well with the Esper Sentinels, Doughty Void Walkers having Shadow, ability scamming Elementals early, and all this synergy it just works very well with Gix. And as sideboard cards were very useful for me. I didn't use Elish or Orvar in any matchups. Didn't They didn't come to me, but it creativity is very common, and the four color I'm not also. So I think it's worth it to have it. I'm very satisfied with the all the sideboard pieces, and Gig's main board especially. I think it's just a very clean looking list, and I'm really this is my third, fourth league I played with it, and every time I had a good result. If you're interested in the last league, you can try to find it on my channel. Maybe a month and a half or 2 months ago, I played it first time, and that's it. So if you like the gameplay, if you liked the deck, if you want to help the channel, click subscribe, click like, and that's it for today. Okay, goodbye.